Now, one person we did hear from today for the first time, Karen Reed herself, doubling down, of course, saying she did not do this. She wants to know who did.
Said it feels we're the only ones fighting for the truth of what happened to John O'Keefe. And me and my family and my attorneys and my team have marshaled every resource to get to the truth. It just feels like no one else wants it.
Karen, just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know.
Yes, we do.
And no, she didn't do it. No, she didn't do it. This is an innocent woman. She didn't do it.
I tried to save his life.
Yeah.
I tried to save his life at 6 in the morning. I was covered in the only one trying to save his life.
Why'd you admit to it?
She didn't admit to it. She didn't admit to anything close to that. Nothing close to that. And you should know that.
That was like 3 or 4 times she admitted to it.
No, she didn't.
That's not true.
She asked a question. She asked a question, which is very different. She didn't admit to anything.
You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
All right, here we go. How is everybody? Want to talk about today cult-like thinking, coercive control, Karen Reed's control over John O'Keefe, and how her relationship and how the killing of John O'Keefe was the end product of relationship violence. And this is something that often gets overlooked in this case, not talked about. It has been talked about in court by the Commonwealth, accepted by the judge, that the Commonwealth is making the argument that this was an abusive relationship. And others, like Boundless Millennial, has made the argument that if Karen Reed were a man, everybody would be talking about this. And John O'Keefe were a woman, but because it's reversed in this case, no one's talking about it, or very few. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And it's being informed. Also, I think in this case, and in all true crime cases, the audience is looking for heroes and they're looking for villains, when in fact we are all a much more complicated mix of faults, not so good qualities, and good qualities. And what narcissistic, psychopathic people do so well is exploit our weaknesses and really exaggerate them. And that's what's happened, I think, with a lot of the witnesses in this case. Unfortunately for the Commonwealth, I think Karen Reed picked Jen McCabe because she was aware of her weaknesses and made her the villain for those reasons, amongst others. So it's not by coincidence that these people were Karen Reed's marks and became villains in the conspiracy story that Karen Reed fed Aiden Turtleboy Carney. Starting off, last night we were talking about, or I was talking about, the 34 Fairview Road podcast and the podcaster Matt Phelps. And I was remarking how, and expanding on the idea that Matthew Valentinus, who's the manager for both Matt Phelps, and Turtleboy. He's no longer the manager for Turtleboy. They've had a falling out. And that and that they both, Matt Phelps and Matthew Valentinus, were championing Turtleboy before Turtleboy did not like the direction of 34 Fairview Road, where Matt Phelps is saying that Karen Reed is guilty of something. We're not sure what yet. So often the refrain on this side is that she's guilty of manslaughter and not murder. I don't know why. I think that the Commonwealth has laid out very clearly why it's not. I went over it before, that if if you leave someone knowing that you left them in a state that could cause serious injury or possibly death, then you are responsible for second-degree murder. But everyone else thinks she's overcharged. Not everyone else. There's a bunch of people on this side of the fence that think she's overcharged. And I'm not exactly sure why, that we can't know Karen Reed's motivation. And I find that very strange that you can't intuit through the evidence her motivation when her foot never touched the brake. It's 75% on the gas pedal, going 24 miles an hour in reverse, with her infotainment system beeping and flashing at her. Danger, you're going to hit something, over and over again, louder and louder and more insistent the closer she got to John O'Keefe. How did she not know? And I keep reading about how she was so drunk when police officers that morning, the people around her that night, no one said Karen Reed seemed that drunk. I think she was a habitual drinker where alcohol really never touched the side. She may have been legally over the limit, but do I think it clouded her thinking so much? No. No. I think Karen Reed, this was the end product of a lot of coercive control on Karen Reed's side. And when they fought that night, which is what Karen Reed said, these psychopaths do tell the truth some of the time. They lie a lot, but they do tell the truth some of the time. She said, John O'Keefe and I fought that night. What did they fight about? Could they have fought about Richie the plumber? The last person who was in Karen Reed's home at 8:30 on a Friday night, when John O'Keefe's father would have gladly fixed Karen Reed's hot water problem for free had she just told John O'Keefe about it. But no, Karen Reed was delayed getting to the bar that night because of Richie the plumber. He had to go to Home Depot or some store like it to get another part for her hot water. Did it really exist? Will this be something explored in the second trial? I'm very anxious to know. Because the first thing I would say to Karen Reed, had that been me, was, how'd you get on with your hot water issues? And it's a very intimate time of day, 8:30 at night on a Friday, to have one man in your house. Was Karen Reed trying to make John O'Keefe guilty? Likely, I think. But apparently we can't intuit anything from the evidence. Karen Reed didn't know. It was an accident, blah, blah, blah. I don't understand these people basically cheering on Karen Reed for reasons unclear to me, why they think that they can't intuit from the evidence that Karen Reed didn't know what she was doing. That's how they interpret the evidence. That's how they interpret a foot 75% on the gas pedal, going 24 miles an hour in reverse with an infotainment system beeping at you, and that she knew right where to find John O'Keefe. Everyone else couldn't see him. But apparently Karen Reed's psychic powers, when she didn't know what she did, even though she told her father that she felt, and I'm going to use Heisenberg's great insight, she felt she hit something, which is the language of experiential memory. She felt, which you would feel something. You would literally feel it in the car when you hit something. She felt she hit something that night. What else was in the road? She felt she hit a deer. She felt she hit a mailbox. She knew right where to find John O'Keefe. She knew right where she hit him, right where to find him, and she did it on purpose. And she even said in other interviews that he didn't look mortally wounded. So she actually checked out her handiwork after she did it. So give me a break with the manslaughter stuff and she didn't know she did it stuff. So yesterday we were talking about how 34 Fairview Road, all the 40% of the profits go to Aiden, Turtleboy, Carney, and that both their manager, meaning Matt Phelps, the podcaster who's created 34 Fairview Road, his manager is Matthew Valentinus, and Aiden Turtleboy Carney, his manager was Matthew Valentinus. Someone made a tweet and I responded to it. Let me share my screen and I'll show you. It's caused a little upset in the Karen Reed world. Hold on one sec. So here we go. Ellie May 1999 wrote, "Who decided it was okay to torment the family of John O'Keefe after his death unmercifully? Maybe if we start there, we can backtrack and find all the hidden clues to why this case has become so ugly online for those speaking out against it, and perhaps why some join in it on it." And I wrote, well, M. William Phelps and Matthew Valentinus cheered on Turtleboy as he was harassing witnesses and tormenting the family. They promoted and cut deals with Turtleboy until Aiden turned on them and threatened their $, I meant money. And I wrote hashtag Karen Reed, hashtag hard truths, hashtag innocence fraud. And I supported that with Matt Phelps's tweet. Thank to Aiden Carney. Thanks, brother. In June, keep fighting the good fight, speaking your truths. I respect that so much. And this one, which is it looks like a email from Matthew Valentinus. You're a brave dude. And definitely push boundaries farther than most would have dared to do, but you'll come out of this stronger and wiser for it. In January of 2024. So for that, hold on one second. For that, there's been kind of a lot of responses from people. Let me go. Oh, geez. I always do that with that. One being from Lavish Love Loss, who's very outspoken on this side of the aisle, very Karen Reed is guilty. Congratulations on your recent attention from Turtleboy. So Turtleboy, Aiden Carney retweeted that, well earned. So she's not saying that anything I said was untrue. It's that, how dare I say it? How dare anyone from this side of the aisle talk about something an uncomfortable truth, or criticize anyone saying that Karen Read is guilty of something, even some minor charge. We should all support them uncritically and band together no matter what they're peddling out and for what reasons. And I don't agree with that. I think I can have my own opinion of 34 Fairview Road. And so what I think the newest refrain from this side is that Aiden Carney isn't going to make any of this money. And I'm going to get to John O'Keefe and Karen Read in a second. But Aiden Carney is very fast learner. I think he's a psychopath. And he has been keeping his side of the bargain. He has still been promoting every week 34 Fairview Road, following his contract. And I think it will be very hard for Matthew Valentinas, even though he is a lawyer, to prove that Aiden Carney hasn't stuck to his side of the bargain. I would find it very weird for a court to say that he's not allowed to say that his own view of the podcast. I don't think that's anywhere in his contract, that he's not allowed to say that the podcast is terrible. He's been promoting it, telling his viewers to download it, and that's his side of the contract. But I think the reason that that's being spread is so that everyone can get behind 34 Fairview Road, because I guess saying that it's an us versus them kind of mentality, that it will be easier for the Commonwealth to get a conviction due to this podcast saying Karen Read is guilty of something, what I don't know yet, then not. And that we should all just band behind it, and that it's informing people and changing minds. But I haven't seen I haven't seen a lot of that. I haven't seen a lot of minds changed with this podcast. I've just seen the lines drawn more definitively. I think the most minds that I've seen changed were after Karen Read's most recent interviews, where she damaged herself, she contradicted herself in those interviews. And I think they were dumb of her to do. But 34 Fairview Road, I don't know if it's doing any great damage to Karen Read or her case, but okay. But I think that ultimately Matthew Valentinas will have to stick by that contract. That's my prediction. Could be wrong. But we can't know that yet. We can't know that Turtleboy's negated it and that a court will rule that way if it goes all the way to court. If Matthew Valentinas chooses to put a lot of time and energy into negating that contract. And time is money, ultimately. So I think that people should pay attention to the red flags in this community and not ignore them just because they're on our side, and assume that everyone who's on our side or saying things that we like is doing it for the right reasons and is a good, reliable source, because that's the way you get disappointed. And I think I've been guilty myself of doing that in this case. So just a friendly reminder to everyone out there to keep your mind open, be skeptical on both sides of whatever you're looking at. Try to listen and learn from both sides of the argument. And try not to get into a cult-like or group-like us versus them thinking. So what is coercive control? I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then I'm going to go to your comments, and then we're going to discuss Karen Reed's controlling relationship. Pulled up a psychologist talking about coercive control and what it is. And it's basically a dynamic of a relationship that's all about power and control. I think that's the easiest way to say it. And here is Dr. Colloquia. I probably terribly mispronounced her name, as I tend to do. Here's her take on it in about 5 minutes. Take a listen.
I sometimes lose sight. I have so much to share with protective parents, and I sometimes lose sight of like the overall focus, which is coercive control. So why do we need to even begin using this word coercive control? What does it mean? It means that we are looking through the non-physical violence model. Historically, we've looked through the violent incident model to determine if someone was a victim of domestic abuse. And what we know is that it is based on power and control, and it is about slowly and insidiously wearing down a person's autonomy, their ability to know what they should know. And these coercive controllers, I like to use the word like as a noun, like the coercive controller, right? What they do is they often seek out people who tend to be accommodating, have these traits of just wanting relationships to work, highly optimistic, and working hard, really working hard. So I've been doing this work since I was the age of 19. I've been a social justice advocate my entire life. And now really looking back, realized that there were so many signs, but I didn't know it while I was living in it. And so I want you to know that it can be extremely nuanced. It can be something as significant as physical violence. But here's the reality. Again, most start off without physically violent characteristics. So some people never have physical violence, never. So,
right. But I was trained by the Gavin DeBecker's organization when I worked for Oprah that the end product, it says it doesn't always go that way, but the end product of these relationships, the most extreme result of it is murder, right? So if you look at Gavin DeBecker technique, he points out red flags. So it could be ripping up a symbolic object, a picture, something that's the person's favorite photo, something that's sentimental to them, something that symbolizes them. And then it can go to stalking, which would be higher up. So if you look at it from, like, say we go from 0 to 10 being murder, right? Like 1 or 2 being ripping up the person's picture. Karen Reed, I think she reached out to him on Facebook because she's the Facebook maven. She said John O'Keefe reached out to her. I find it odd. I think she reached out to him and said, "Hey, stranger, what do you do? Long time no talk." She had met him at a party with his sister. She had heard that his sister had died of cancer, that he was in a vulnerable state, raising 2 kids. And so the same thing that cults do. People tend to join cults at a time of change, at a time when they're vulnerable. She's going to exploit that and have a little bit, she'll have the upper hand because she's in a more secure place in her life. He's still trying to figure out this parenting thing, grieving over his sister and brother-in-law's death. And Karen Reed thinks that's a good time to come in. And she picked him out as a mark.
So what we know is that it can be insidious, it's gaslighting, manipulation, it's threats, like undermining threats, like, if you do that, your children aren't going to love you, or, if you do that, I don't know, maybe I'll stay out later next time. Like, in other words, there's always a consequence for.
Stephanie Harlow, sorry. watching the whack jobs. I just saw your comment out of the corner of my eye. Stephanie Harlow, who talks about true crime on YouTube, is, I think, one of the biggest innocence fraudsters out there. Her 3-piece series on the West Memphis 3, she said she was reading the transcripts. Everything she said was entirely from the West Memphis 3 innocence fraud documentaries. None of it was from the transcripts that I recall. It was horrible, and painted them as martyrs too. She's jumped on the free Karen Reed grift. I'm not surprised at all. She's been painting Reed as a martyr, selfless, saintly stepmother. But the children tell quite a different. So John O'Keefe's nieces and nephews tell quite a different story in their testimony.
Any kind of disagreement. In other words, I'm not allowed to express how I feel about something, because if I do, then when I express that, it's going to be held against me. And so there's revenge. What we know is Rosenfeld and colleagues talk about these people being drawn towards conflict, which is why the family court, why any legal aspect becomes like their stage. They just love it. They love it. We saw that with Johnny Depp for sure.
Or they love being the star and the accused in a murder trial, right? Don't you think Karen Reed just loves every day of trial? She looks like she's enjoying every moment of it. She gets a little bored when the spotlight's not on her. But you watch the way she comes to court like she's a movie star. Entering stage left. So yeah, she does love conflict, and she made this the fight. She's the one who orchestrated all the witness harassment, the rolling rally. It's been alleged she's been behind that. She's certainly been behind leaking things to Aiden Turtleboy Carney. She loves the fight of it.
So I think that it's really important to highlight for people that it's nuance. That just because you weren't locked in a room or put on a budget doesn't mean it's not coercive control. Ask yourself these questions. Do I have a right to express my opinion? When I express my opinion, am I told that I'm too sensitive, or that I'm being too dramatic, or, maybe being a baby? Am I made fun of? Mockery is one of their favorite tools. They love to make fun of people, but then say, oh, it's just a joke, right? And so, or are they maybe in some ways saying, oh, I love you so much. Why are you going out again tonight with your friends? So there is an isolation that occurs. And of course, that intimidation, if you leave me, then, maybe something as drastic as your children will know who you really are, but maybe just if you leave me, I don't know what I'd do without you. You are my soulmate. So there's always this push-pull that creates a trauma bond, which we can talk about in another video. But I think it's really important to understand that it's not black and white. It's very nuanced. Ask yourself again, am I able to be myself? Am I accepted and loved for who I am? Is this person using my vulnerabilities against me? And what is your vulnerabilities? Like, ask yourself, wait a minute, these are my vulnerabilities. The love of my children, the desire to have a family, my job maybe, or, the love of my partner. These people know what are.
Does anybody remember Karen Reed saying it wasn't she who's toxic? That it was only when the kids she was with John O'Keefe and the children, that the four of them were toxic together. It wasn't her making it toxic. It was the children making their relationship toxic. And that was the thing that John O'Keefe was the most attached to. Thought this was just a really interesting 5 minutes, and expressed in a way I didn't see very often.
Our vulnerabilities are because we share and we are transparent, and they are not. They have an entire veil. So what I really want to say, though, is that in this family system, children are not just exposed to or witnesses to, they are actually victims of this because they are learning to regulate their behavior much like the adult victim does. She walks on eggshells. She is always worried about being in trouble or expressing herself.
That's exactly what Kaylee said about Karen Reed. We felt like we were walking on eggshells around her. She would give John O'Keefe or them the silent treatment for days if they displeased her or they weren't thankful enough to her. And right, 65 CJ5, I think that's the one. Nothing is ever, oh, that's Legion saying that. Nothing is ever Karen's fault. Sorry, Legion. Nothing's ever Karen's fault. Exactly. She's never going to apologize. And you see that in the text messages on that night before the Richie the Plumber text messages. She's calling John O'Keefe constantly. So he's like, stop calling me. She doesn't respect his boundaries. She keeps calling. She keeps texting. She doesn't give him a minute break, constantly trying to involve him in a discussion and an argument. So it's her needs are just forced on him. And how do I say that? Just there's no boundary. She doesn't respect his boundaries at all. She has to have him totally engaged with her at all times. It's exhausting. And he had thrown her out a week or two before his murder, and she refused to leave. So yeah, it's like, I'll go and I believe that he broke up with her that night. And that was her final message, her final expression of her power and control over him. I decide who lives and dies. I decide whether you breathe or not. And you can see when she talks about it, it's like it's not surprising to me that she's told so many people, I hit him, because she's proud of it. It's the ultimate expression of her power. It's dark stuff, I know.
In some way, like, I'm really upset about this, and then being told that she's crazy for being upset or overly dramatic, or look at her, she's really angry. Like, I remember one time I went out and I was really frustrated about a situation, and I said, that's it, I'm going out to mow the lawn. And apparently when I went out to mow the lawn, I was made fun of and ridiculed for being so angry while I was mowing the lawn. I mean, seriously, isn't that a really great coping mechanism, going out and mowing the lawn? I think it is. So I wasn't banging on the lawnmower. I wasn't doing anything. I was just mowing that lawn because I was letting it out. Yet it was held against me. And it was said in a way that diminished me in the home. So really knowing that if you are not in a position of personal power and someone is taking that away, personal power is an excellent thing. We all need it. And if someone is taking that away, that's problematic. And when it's happening in the home, the children are experiencing that. So we really need to really pivot to understanding that's child abuse. It's never the victim's fault, ever. It is the abuser who is trying to abuse the children in some way, regulate them, teaching them these tactics, strategies, weaponizing them against the protective parent. So much more to say, but have a great day. Bye.
Okay, so if you want to watch more of Dr. Colloquia's stuff, its link is in the description of this episode. That will link to that video, and therefore you can find her channel. But I thought that was pretty interesting. Let's get into your comments from the last episode and more. I think I took it from the last 2 episodes because I missed yesterday. So let's get into it.
We got your comments. You had something to say. You were insightful. Oh, so clever. So Roberta's going to read your comments. Hey, Roberta, read those comments.
Okay. First comment. I think this is like too connected. I'm loving Hank, and there is no disrespect to Adam Lally. And Lazy Susan writes, I absolutely love Hank Brennan, but I was watching Lally in the beginning, and unlike the defense table, he wasn't speaking with Hank Brennan. Sadly, Lally, he was just sitting there sorting through papers, but even worse, his body language spoke volumes. Lally was slumped over, isolating himself, looked defeated. Hopefully, in the future, we'll see more interactions between Hank Brennan and Adam Lally. It didn't appear they were a team. Yeah, that's true. I don't know about that. I don't know if that's, I always thought that was his usual kind of very workmanshiply way of, but you may be right. This may be something I missed. Adding Hank Brennan to the team doesn't help what we were all talking about, that the Commonwealth only has one man prosecuting. Good point. I really hope Lally is involved a little bit. I'm quickly becoming a Hank Brennan groupie, but I always thought Lally did an admirable job. I agree. I think he would have won his case had we had a fair jury. Would it have been was he a fun TV-ready TV lawyer? No. Or YouTube lawyer? Or no. Was he dramatic? No, but I think he proved his case. But we'll never know. What I've heard was 2 Karen Reed supporters were on the jury. We'll never know. I think picking the jury is going to be the most important thing. And hope he can be utilized even in a small part, as he knows the case like no one else. He sure does, Adam Lally. Hope they work together. Yeah, I hope that as this goes on, they'll start working together. I just always thought of Adam Lally as the behind the scenes guy, but you're right, Lazy Susan, when Hank Brennan said that he had his own paralegal there, it made me think, oh no, Hank Brennan is he brought in his own paralegal? Is he isolated from the rest of the team? Are we making a team here? Because ultimately, I hope Adam Lally gave him everything he had, and they're working together to craft, and that Adam Lally is a more behind the scenes type of lawyer. He doesn't seem, to my eye, he doesn't seem to enjoy opening statement and closing statement the way some lawyers do, or cross-examination, trying cases. Some lawyers really love it. And really love being in the spotlight. I never thought that of Adam Lally. Chad Glassify says they were both drunk, meaning John O'Keefe and Karen Reed. Each is to blame. If Karen is guilty of vehicular manslaughter, it won't be adjudicated as murder. I don't even know what to say about this line of thinking. So John O'Keefe's to blame because he was walking to his friend's house when he got struck. I don't get it. If he had not drunk that night and gotten out of the car, if he had sipped on water, as Karen Reed told Gretchen Voss, and gotten out of the car and just sipped on water, like Karen Reed told Gretchen Voss, and gotten out of the Karen Reed's Lexus, he would have been less likely to have been struck? Or is it his fault because he went to a bar that night with his friends? I mean, this is the kind of victim blaming. I don't even know what to say. And I don't know where you're getting manslaughter. You may be right, a jury may decide on a lesser charge like manslaughter, but I think they'd be ignoring a lot of the motivation and the evidence that shows motivation and what Karen Reed knew. I think I'm going to be going over what the difference between manslaughter and second-degree murder charge soon, so we can all talk about it in reference to the evidence and some of the reasons why she wasn't charged with lesser, why they upped the charges in this case. Susan Q 7870 says, I have listened to 34 Ferry Road, the podcast. She's talking about Matt Phelps's podcast twice, but he had to pay the devil. He had to pay the devil. He didn't have a choice to get the podcast. She writes documentary out, but podcast out. Did he? I think it was a choice that Aidan Carney had a big audience and they wanted the money from his audience's downloads. He could have chosen to make less money, certainly, and done it that way. I think it's a choice. I don't think he had to do anything. And again, the argument that he will not get paid, he has breached his contract and will likely have to try fighting them in court. No, but he's promoted it every week. I think you're getting into the weeds of the contract saying that he can't disparage it and arguing that he did disparage it. I think that will be much harder to argue. Had he done something stupid and not promoted it, it would be very easy to say, see, he never promoted it. He never kept up his part of the bargain, but he sure did. Despite his feelings about the podcast, he kept promoting it in his psychopathic, clever way. So I don't think there's any guarantee that that's going to happen. I'm predicting he's going to get his 40%. That's just my view on it. Knowing the law and knowing how these things turn out. Often. Bling is the new black. Thanks for being a member. Let's get back into it. So, talking about Karen Reed again. And what are these relationships? Rick Ross, who is really the premier expert on cults, did a fascinating video. We're not going to watch all of it because it is quite long, but we are going to watch some of it. Talks about the elements, and not all the elements he talks about. Like he talks about culture of confession, and that's something that didn't come out in the evidence in this case. But a lot of it did apply to Karen Reed and John O'Keefe. And one of the things that coercive controllers do is they come on very strong at first. They love bomb, then they discard, they degrade, and then they discard. So the ultimate discarding of Karen Reed, that Karen Reed did of John O'Keefe, is when she hit him and left him there in the cold to expire cruelly as she planned her own case in the warmth of John O'Keefe's house. She entered it like a burglar. She wasn't supposed to be at his house that night. She was supposed to be at her own home. And she planned exactly how to get out of it that night. I think she spent those hours planning it before she eventually woke up Kaylee, John's niece, the early morning hours, and got her to call Jennifer McCabe, etc. So she did very little. If you look at what Karen Reed did, she did very little. She didn't call 911. She never cleared off the snow from John O'Keefe's face. When she did find him, meaning she knew exactly where he was. When she came back to where she knew he was, let's put it that way, she immediately got on top of him, straddled him, lifted up her shirt, lifted up his shirt, which would do what exactly? I mean, Carrie Roberts' testimony says he was still under like feet of snow and his airways were never cleaned out. So I think they all knew he was past help at that point, but she didn't even try. When you know someone, even when you know they're past help, most people try because they so desperately don't want, are in shock and can't come to terms. Karen Reed was performing that kind of shock, performing her own version, screaming, Carrie, Carrie, Jen, Jen, in their ears all the way to 34 Fairview Road. Then kicking the door and screaming and running around and trying to act like a crazy person, which strangely got her conveniently sanctioned by her father, who, in my view, is being accused of being a co-conspirator in some ways by Hank Brennan. And I think rightfully, good for Hank Brennan. I think both her father and her mother know a lot more than they've let on. So let's watch Rick Ross. When he talks about, he starts out talking about OJ, which is certainly a very extreme version of this kind of relationship. But let's take a listen. Karen Reed is a much more, actually I was talking about love bombing. Hold on one second. Karen Reed does everything by proxy, right? By other people, by intermediaries. She very seldom gets her hands dirty. If she could have used a hitman in this case, she would have. Do you know what I'm saying? So she used her car. She liked that her car, it gave her plausible deniability that she didn't mean to do it. She uses other people as intermediaries. But during her end of her relationship, with John O'Keefe, she was texting Brian Higgins, his friend, and Brian Higgins, a special ATF agent and former firefighter, received a text message from an unknown number reading, "Hey, Brian, it's the weed whacker." Brian replied with a question mark. This turned out to be Karen Reed. Brian Higgins helped save the life of a colleague in 2010. This is from Innocence Fraud Watch's interactive dynamic timeline of the Karen Reed case. Link is in the episode description of this episode. Brian first met John O'Keefe and Karen Reed around a year before, or a little over a year before, January 2002. On January 15th, Brian Higgins went to John O'Keefe's house to watch the Patriots playoff game against the Buffalo Bills. Brian recalled arriving at some point in the second half of the game and being one of the last guests to leave. Brian said that when he was walking to the front door of John's home to leave, Karen suggested that she walk him out through the downstairs garage. Walking him through the garage, Brian said that Karen Reed made an advance on him and surprised him with a romantic kiss. During the course of the interview, Mr. Higgins provided Massachusetts State Police with printouts of his text communications with both the victim and the defendant. Mr. Higgins indicated that he had first received a text from a then unknown number, and in the text communications offered to the grand jury, the defendant confirms their kiss and urges Mr. Higgins not to worry. So Karen Reed tells Brian Higgins don't to worry, as Karen Reed knows where the cameras are in John O'Keefe's house. See, she's very adept to making her own evidence and knows where she won't leave evidence. And this is a pattern that will continue in the case. The defendant then invites Mr. Higgins over to her home in Mansfield. An invitation Mr. Higgins stated he declined. However, the defendant did stop by Mr. Higgins' home on her way home from a night out with friends in Boston to discuss their relationship prior to January 28th, source February 3rd, 2022 interview with Troopers Proctor and Buchanan. Brian Higgins himself provided 56 pages of text messages. That's exhaustive, right? 56 pages of text messages between himself and Karen Reed. Below are screenshots of the messages. Karen Reed sent via intermediary Natalie Wawiki. We went over her interview, police interview, to Aiden Turtleboy Carney. So Karen Reed writes, Higgins hit on me all the time. Never laid a pinky finger on him. She just lies. Canton was not a legit investigator, was an intern or something. Tell him that tipster is bad, not public. Levy confirmed no swarms of FBI were in Canton. And then she goes on to say that I think the tipster was watching a funeral procession. I'd admit to Higgins because it would lend to motive in a huge way, but it didn't happen. He wishes. But we know it did happen. And Karen Reed seemingly called her father, William Reed, at 4:47 p.m. on the day she kissed Brian Higgins. The call lasted 3 minutes and 17 seconds. So, and here are the messages. You're hot. And he was very wary of her, and I think sussed her out as a dangerous person and someone not to be involved with, or someone he didn't want to be involved with. Are you serious or are you messing with me? No, I'm serious. Feeling is mutual. Is that bad? How long have you thought that? Are you okay driving? You don't want to stay here. So this is a pattern that goes through all their text messages, which are read in court. He would ask a question and she would avoid answering it. I am fine. I have an office at the PD. You didn't answer the question. See, he nails her on that there. Better you stay here. And then again, she doesn't answer the question. So she's evasive. And I believe he sussed her out pretty well. But again, kind of the immediately coming on very, very strong. Big red flag in these kind of relationships. Let's take a listen to what cold expert Rick Ross has to say about them.
Older and seemingly could do no wrong. She later wrote about her wonderful life with the superstar, that wonderful man, O.J. Simpson, who it seems authorities apparently always found it difficult to believe was a wife-beater. Loading the language, the presence of thought-terminating verbiage or jargon. Lifton explains this as taking the most far-reaching and complex problems and compressing them into brief, highly reductive, definitive-sounding phrases. This type of verbiage then becomes the frequent start and or finish of many discussions or arguments and is used to dismiss individual expression, the exploration of alternative ideas, or the search for perspective and balance. Many of the women I have spoken to trapped within abusive controlling relationships refer to such language, which...
So this is often he'll say the women. So more often than not, women are the victims. But in this case, we have reverse biological sexism,
which is used to abruptly end an argument or dismiss concerns or grievances about the partner's behavior. He will say they are whining, spoiled, disloyal, label them as flirtatious, idiotic, incompetent, or even an adulterer. Needless to say, much more colorful and harsh language may be used to effectively...
Does anybody remember how many times Karen Reed? And it's not only does she say this before she hit him, but afterwards. I hate you. You're pervert. You're always says, is there somebody else? You're sleeping around. When she was the unfaithful one, there's been no evidence that we've seen that John O'Keefe was unfaithful, or else I'm sure the defense would have trotted it out.
Stop the victim from thinking. The litany of damning words is used like a barrage to destroy any meaningful analysis or consideration about the ongoing situation. The vocabulary of insults invalidates the submitting partner's thoughts and feelings, and in the most abusive situations may be accompanied by physical violence. Doctrine over person. The subordination of experience and reality to the claims of the abuser. This can be seen by the preeminence of the dominating partner's ideas, views, and interpretations, which overwhelm the victim's thinking and analysis. There is a constant shift between the victim's actual experience and the superimposing of the abuser's interpretation of that experience, between genuine feelings and the abuser's spurious cataloging and labeling of those feelings. This in part explains the peculiar disconnect from reality that the submissive partner's mindset seems to reflect to those outside the abusive controlling relationship.
So let's look at some of these messages, because I thought this was pretty interesting in light of some of these messages. Let me just share my screen real quick. So this is documented in the timeline. So Karen Reed called John O'Keefe 18 times between 9:19 a.m. and 2:59 p.m. 18 times. John rejected 11 of Karen's calls and missed 4. Phone records suggest John answered 4 of Karen's calls and made one lengthy call to her at 10:53 a.m. Leading up to the night at the waterfall, the defendant and O'Keefe exchanged several text messages about their strained relationship. So you can see all these calls. And so she calls and leaves messages, one lasting call. Oh, she called John O'Keefe. The call lasted 15 minutes and 29 seconds at 9:19, 9:35. Karen Reed calls John O'Keefe. The call lasts 4 minutes and 2 seconds. And Karen Reed's telling John O'Keefe, message, you have really hurt me this time. And John O'Keefe replies, I'm sorry. This has, referring to his niece and nephew, I'm sorry this has been an issue for me for 8 years. It physically hurts me to see everyone else in their life do things for them, and I'm forced to always be the bad guy. So he sees himself as the bad guy. Pretty interesting. I'm sure that's nothing of the dialogue that he's been hearing from Karen Reed from 2 years. That's me being a little sarcastic. 10:09 a.m. Karen Reed replies, I'm not the same as everyone else. See, she's special, guys. Most of the time, I try to do what is healthy, smart for them. See, she's the good guy. More importantly, I try to support you. Oh, she's so good. And what you need. See, she's exactly what Rick Ross just told. She's using her language to frame the relationship in the way that she wants to. You just lashed out at me and said terrible things out of nothing. It was nothing that I said or did. You just lashed out. I don't know how you've gotten to this point with me. When I'm trying my hardest, you made your point and continue to beat me down. I have a lot going on too. Physically, I'm falling apart. And I'm wondering, the first time that she showed up with Yannetti at the first arraignment, he said she had a brain tumor, that she had her entire colon removed. 34 Fairview Road says she has a colostomy bag, and that's never been supported by any court evidence. And I believe that's from Proctor's own imaginings and text messages. But Phelps says it like it's true from what Yannetti says, but we know she never had a brain tumor. But I wonder if she was telling John O'Keefe these things, that she had a brain tumor and they weren't sure what it was, and if she was playing on John O'Keefe's trauma from his experience with his sister who did die from that. What do you guys think? You made your point. Physically, I'm falling apart and trying to get answers and help. So I think that was another way for Karen Reed. I wonder if she has any of the things that she says she has, including MS. I don't know. No evidence has ever been supported, and Karen Reed is an unreliable narrator. But you can certainly have your entire colon removed and not have that kind of colostomy bag. So that could be, I tend to think she didn't have that operation, but it's anyone's guess. 10:46 a.m. Karen messaged John, I'm just your girlfriend. I'm not a perfect parent. I'm trying very hard and sometimes treat them nothing like I used to. And John replied, I know, I'm sorry for lashing out. I'm just hurting and struggling daily with them and always feeling like I'm failing at this parenting thing. I wasn't built for this. So is this something that Karen is making him feel, that he wasn't made for this parenting thing? Or is that John O'Keefe's own thoughts? Hard to know.
They essentially see themselves in a role as cast by their controller. That is, they begin to catalog their thoughts and feelings according to the labels forced upon them. They are labeled stupid, ugly, fat, or worthless. So they not only come to believe these tormenting insults, but also subordinate their experience and feelings to fit their dominant partner's projected view of them. Every perceived mistake, action, or thought is then filed within these labeled categories of existence and experience. They have been coerced to accept them. All of this further validates the demeaning and debilitating image their abuser has imposed upon them and destroys self-esteem. Nicole Brown Simpson once called herself the girl with no self-esteem or self-worth in her disturbing letter to OJ. This reflects the distorted version of reality so often expressed by battered women. They see themselves through the eyes of their abuser. Dispensing of existence. The abuser draws a sharp line between those who have a right to exist in his world and those who have no such right. This is a contrived emotional conflict between what Lifton calls being versus nothingness. The victim comes to feel that existence is dependent upon submission to the controlling partner and his version of reality. This becomes the only means of validation as opposed to virtual extinction. And even when the abuser does not resort to physical violence, this mindset creates unreasonable but nevertheless controlling fear. The only way to overcome that fear is to gain the approval or confirmation from the dominant partner.
So I'm not suggesting that Karen Reed was violent, although she may have been, but she did it with the silent treatment by blowing up into rages, so that I don't think Haley was the only one who felt that they were walking on eggshells around Karen, and that Karen, and I think it's really interesting that Rick Ross here highlights that Karen Reed's perception of himself becomes John O'Keefe's perception of the situation. And that he's the problem. Although he did say to Brian Camerano that, is that right? Do I have his first name right? Am I remembering that right? That he was annoyed with Karen and he was moving away from her. So as he's pulling away at the end, she's doing everything, calling him 1,000 times to get back the control. He doesn't, before she's in the degrade stage, before she finally discards him. But he's trying to escape it. And no, you don't leave me, I leave you. This is the tension that's going on at the end of their relationship here.
Repeatedly, Ike told Tina Turner she was nothing without him. And for some time, she believed that his confirmation was vital and important. I have witnessed the results of this process over and over again in numerous cases. Submissive partners literally remaking their lives and reinventing their personal histories to comply with the terms of existence as established by their controlling partner. This dispensing of existence is also applied to family, friends, and co-workers. Hedda Nussbaum recalls that Joel Steinberg not only made his confirmations important, but portrayed her family as evil at the root of her supposed bad behavior. Therefore, they didn't have a right to exist in her world any longer. Do abusers such as Ike Turner, O.J. Simpson, or Joel Steinberg actually have a well-worn copy of Lifton sitting on the shelf? No, I don't think so. Most abusers learn through a process of hit and miss.
So Lifton is a cult expert. So he's comparing cult-like thinking to the mindset that the victim gets in. And I thought this is check out this whole video. The link is in the description of this episode. I really learned a lot from it. I love Rick Ross. He was a really important part in bringing down NXIVM, and he fought them. They sued him legally, and the evidence that came into that case was an important part. They actually falsified evidence in that case that came into charges in the NXIVM case that Nancy Salzman ended up pleading out to, who was the number 2 in the NXIVM cult. So much as left out of the vow. Oh boy, check out my episode on that. I think it's called What the Vow Won't Tell You. So The Vow is the documentary on the NXIVM cult led by Keith Raniere and Nancy Salzman.
Like the majority of cult leaders, they devise their method through personal experience and gut instincts. The abuser quickly realizes that by eliminating any outside influence, he can create a vacuum and achieve dominance. Also, then by tormenting his victim with alternating expressions of love and then threats and insults, he can produce fear and obtain submission. Some estimates say that 95% of all those victimized through abusive controlling relationships are women. This means most abusers are men. But what kind of men are they? Research, personal accounts, and my own work experience seem to place many abusers within a certain profile, often called a narcissistic personality. Generally, abusive controlling partners act grandiose. This is often evident through self-obsessed fantasies and behavior, and it seems they need and feed not only on control, but require constant admiration and lack empathy.
Who does that sound like? Require constant admiration and lack empathy. So I would call Karen Reed a psychopath, but we know that all psychopaths are also narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. She lacks empathy. She never said she's sorry in any of these texts or communications. She's just too good, too well-meaning, and that's her fault. It's like the job interview. What's your weakness? I'm a workaholic. I'm a perfectionist. I care too much about my job. I have work-job balance. So Karen Reed, much the same. And even though she's a woman, certainly you can see her in this profile. And he says 95%. So I guess Karen Reed's in the 5% of women.
These are features that define a narcissistic personality type, as found within the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders published by the American Psychiatric Association. If someone you are concerned about or involved with has 5 or more of the following characteristics, you are probably dealing with a person that could be diagnosed with a narcissistic personality disorder. A grandiose sense of self-importance, often exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without real work involved. Seems preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Believes that he is special and unique, can only be understood by or should associate with other special, high-status people and or institutions. Requires excessive admiration. Has a sense of entitlement, unreasonable expectations.
Yeah, I just find that I just want to go back a little bit. Hold on one second to the just should only be associated with other special high status people. You can see the way Karen is around her lawyers. Often almost looks like she wants to be her lawyers. She picked very high profile lawyers. Unetti is very big in that area. Alan Jackson is famous for prosecuting Phil Spector, and he's a famous defense attorney, frequent talking head. And you can see that when her lawyers get up, and when Voss's lawyers got up to argue, and he was elderly and a little disheveled, you could just see her look of distaste. And appearances are very important to her. Status is very important to her. Power is very important to her. This is something that Aidan Carney has picked out in his text messages that were leaked, that appearances are very important to the Reed family, certainly to Karen Reed. She's in the in crowd. Her lawyers are the in crowd, her team. And I think being on Team Free Karen Reed gives people a feeling of being in the in crowd. And sadly, the anti-Karen Reed crowd is becoming like that, very cliquish. And if you're not saying the right things, like that she's overcharged, or not pushing the idea that Phelps is the greatest journalist ever and a hero, for first applauding Turtleboy and cutting deals with him, and then turning on him and making a negative podcast after he threatens your money about him. If you're not bearing that fact and applauding and pushing 34 Fairview Road, then you're not part of the clique.
Be understood by or should associate with other special high status people and or institutions. Requires excessive admiration. Has a sense of entitlement, unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his expectations. Exploits and takes advantage of others to achieve his own ends. Lacks empathy and is unwilling to...
Well, let's talk about the exploits and takes advantage of others to achieve her own ends. I think this is a really key factor with Karen Reed. She used Natalie as the middle person, and when she thought Natalie was participating in a documentary, she dropped her. She certainly uses the people who are on the ground to come to court and protest for her, but she doesn't want to invite them to the in-crowd dinner, right? She has her in-crowd dinner, the people that are really making tons of money. So it's a mutual using society she's got going. So the free Karen readers are using Karen Read for money, and she's using them to push her narrative. And I would say that's her relationship with Aiden Carney. He uses her leaks, and she uses him to push her narrative and to intimidate witnesses, to just scare everybody into silence who think she's guilty. She lacks empathy, and you've seen her disparaging the family, the O'Keefe family, in her text messages. I think all these qualities go for Aiden as well, and is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Right. All the sympathy you can see in her text messages, all the sympathy should go to her. No sympathy for John O'Keefe. He's terrible in beating her down.
Recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Is often envious of others, or believes that others are envious of him or her. Shows arrogant, haughty behavior or attitudes. Practical advice and further information about narcissism and narcissists can be found at the website What Makes Narcissists Tick. A good book to help understand this disorder and its discomforting effects is Why Is It Always About You? The 7 Deadly Sins of Narcissism by Sandy Hotchkiss. Like a leopard that can't change its spots, most narcissists seem unable to change their behavior or stop the damage they often do to others as a result of this disorder. Many have observed that the best protection or solution for those negatively affected is to avoid becoming seriously involved or further entangled with such people. How can you avoid or recognize the early warning signs of an abusive, controlling relationship? Here are key behaviors to look for as outlined by Hedda Nussbaum, who now shares her experience through lectures to help other women avoid what she once endured. The relationship is moving too fast. Your partner is planning a future together from the moment you meet. If he hates his mother and is nasty to her, chances are that you can expect the same. Your partner wants your undivided attention at all times. You feel controlled because he must always be in charge. He is competitive and always must win. Breaks promises all the time. Can't take criticism and always justifies his actions. Blames others for anything that goes wrong. Often, that someone is you. Seems jealous of your close friends and
family members. Anyone, Aruba, anyone? Where she screamed and accused John of infidelity with another woman on their group trip. Constantly accused John of having affairs. You can see this in the text message. Check out the timeline. I'm going to go back to it in a second. Can't take criticism and always justifies actions. Hold on. Let's take a look at some of these. Whoop, sorry, wrong one. Karen sent John another message reading. I feel pretty itty about how this morning went down. I know you said sorry, but it really stung, especially when I've tried pretty hard lately. See, I'm the good one. I feel like a loser. And that's something that she said to him after hitting him, called him and left him a message. You're a loser. But she feels like a loser, turning around and coming back over after everything you said. Like, how could I ever forgive you after you eventually blew your stack after all this coercive control and said how you really felt? John replied, not sure what else you want me to do. I said, I'm sorry, something that we don't see Karen Reed doing in these. And I was out of line. If you prefer to stay home, I totally get it. Karen replied again, get out the world's smallest violin and feel pity for her. Things in my own life have been difficult too. John replied, I know. And then Karen Reed calls again, 2 minutes, 27 seconds at 2:17, called John O'Keefe. The call lasted 1 minute and 7 seconds. And then by 2:24, John O'Keefe is again rejecting her calls. He just, 2 calls is enough. Within, what is this, a 5-minute span, 10-minute span? 2:25, Karen Reed messages John O'Keefe, tell me if you're interested in someone else. Can't think of any other reason you've been like this. John replied, nope. John then messaged Karen, things haven't been great between us for a while. Ever consider that? And then he rejects another call from her. Kids are here, not in the mood to talk. But at 2:29, but Karen Reed pays no mind to that and his boundaries, that he doesn't want to talk, but she's going to keep texting him anyway. So you're not into it anymore? That's fine, but I don't want to keep trying if you're keep treating me like this. Right? It's him that's treating her like this. See, he basically expressed how he felt about her or her behavior, and it's him treating her like this instead of expressing problems within the relationship, her coercive, controlling behavior. Karen also messaged John. I think this is one of the more interesting text messages. I'm trying to hug and kiss you this morning, and you whack me. Whack, the weed whacker gets whacked, and you whack me in the face with a pillow. And then Karen also stated, last night you were basically like, yeah, what about, when we were talking about the future? So why don't you just admit it? You're not into it so much anymore. John replied, not how it went down, but okay. So I find these three very interesting. So she's saying he hit her with a pillow and wasn't interested in talking about the future. And he's like, that's not how any of that went down, but I'm too exhausted. I've been getting text messages and phone calls. I'm too exhausted by you, which is one of the reasons they do it, to even argue my case anymore with you. Because I know you're not going to admit guilt to any of this. You're not going to say you're sorry. It's not going to go anywhere. There's only one direction this is going to go, for me to relent and say I'm sorry. And that you're great and I'm horrible. That's the only way this conversation is going to go. But I love how she's writing, and I always wonder about this message. I'm trying to hug and kiss you this morning, and you whack me in the face with a pillow. I've often wondered if she was fantasizing about hitting him with her car, doing some kind of other thing to him, and making her own evidence, as she likes to do, that she was in some kind of abusive relationship. Kind of a Betty Broderick type defense. What do you guys think? Just going to play a little bit more of this.
Family members. Extreme and unpredictable highs and lows. A nasty temper. Makes you feel you're not good enough. Withdraws his love or approval as punishment. Pushes you to do things that make you feel uneasy.
Okay, makes you feel you're not good enough. Bing. Withdrawals. We know that Karen Reed would often, this is something Kaylee talked about, go give the silent treatment. approval or love as punishment. Bingo. Or says that she has a plumber over at night. She's moved on to someone else, possibly the plumber. She's alone with a strange man at 8:30 at night in her apartment doing the job that you normally would do. This John O'Keefe and his father would normally fix her hot water issue, but she's moved in someone new. Pushes you to do things that make you feel uneasy. And I wondered about Karen Reed driving after so many drinks. John O'Keefe is a cop. Had she got pulled over in an accident, it would have been a terrible situation for him, even though he wasn't driving. I think that it had to be a regular thing that what I'm saying, alcohol didn't touch the sides and that she frequently drove like that. No respect for your opinion and frequently says you don't know what you're talking about. I would guess that's pretty regular.
No respect for your opinion and frequently says you don't know what you're talking about. He becomes jealous of any man you talk to, always asks you where you went and whom you saw. What can you do if a loved one becomes involved in an abusive control?
Okay, so I think that was a good rundown. I think that's where I'm going to leave it for today. But it certainly fits Karen Reed like a glove, and the relationship with John O'Keefe, as outlined by these text messages. I can't even imagine being called that many times. I mean, it just goes on all day, every 3 minutes, getting a call or a text. I mean, if you know you've been in a relationship like that, all encompassing. And she tells Aaron, who is Paul O'Keefe's wife, just another day. I wish I didn't talk to an O'Keefe after 2004. And it takes all day to make plans to meet for drinks. I mean, come on. What a freaking nightmare. No? All right. Have a good night, everybody. I'm off tomorrow, but I'll see you Tuesday at 6 p.m. See you then.
I hit my boyfriend with my car. It wasn't an accident, but with lying lawyers I'll go far. Lying lawyers and witness harassment, I'll avoid prison. It was snowing. I pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system a clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my second victim. Carry, Jen, like John, you were my mom. My innocence fraud campaign is my biggest hit yet. I hit my boyfriend with my car. It wasn't an accident, but with lying lawyers I'll go far. Lying lawyers and witness harassment, I'll avoid prison. It was snowing. I pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system a clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my second victim. Carry, Jen. this fraud campaign is my biggest hit yet. I